Okay, we're back. Hey, how's everyone doing? This time we're going to do some GED questions. Question number 1, the Mayflower Compact did which of the following? Was it A, this document gave consent to persons of all faiths to practice religion? Was it B, this document allowed the European settlers to remove Indians from the United States? Was it C, this document was the first document that allowed Native Americans and European colonists to stop fighting against each other? Was it D, this document allowed Native Americans to return to these lands? Well, if you answer this, remember what the Mayflower Compact was. And let's go over what your answer is. Your answer is actually C, because we have to talk about the Mayflower. Keep in mind, the Mayflower was a ship and it was a British ship, that went from Britain over to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and you can read the rest of these on your own. So when they were first landing, okay, one of the things that the British wanted to do, and other European colonists too, was to get along with the people who were already there. Who were those people? Well, if it was Massachusetts, they were Native Americans. Anywhere like Massachusetts, New York, they were Native Americans. Anything else before it was Native Americans, and actually some Spanish were here before, due to Mexico being owned by the Spanish. Question number 2. Which of the following is a major difference between the British and the French colonization in the United States? This question is tricky. Question A, the French intermarried with Native Americans and were not as brutal as the British. Question B, the British wanted more money than the French. Question C, the British abandoned their territories while the French did not abandon their territories. Question D, the French formed friendships with the Native American tribes and the British scorned the Native Americans. Okay, well, let's take a look at all of this. Why don't we go bottom up? Both groups originally formed friendships or alliances so that there wouldn't be any fighting, because remember, a lot of the Native American groups were already fighting amongst each other. So it's not really that. And this question isn't really focusing on friendships. When you talk about colonization, you're talking about land ownership. Question number C, answer number C, the British abandoned their territories while the French did not abandon their territories. Look at that word abandon. And when you look at this word abandon, you have to keep in mind that abandon is not something that people have a tendency to do. Okay, very few British, French, German, Dutch abandon anything in the United States, and Native Americans weren't really abandoning. They were forced off, but it was years after the Mayflower landed. Question B, the British wanted more money than the French. No matter who you are, who wants more money than someone else and who wants less? So that's just a distractor, that question, that answer response. And so A, believe it or not, the French intermarried with the Native Americans and were not as brutal as the British. That's the answer. Okay, let's take a look at the map just so you get some history. You know, a lot of these places, Louisiana, named after King Louis, okay, who it was owned by the French. If you were to go up further up here, upper country, it was Detroit, which means of the right. It's Detroit, which means of the right, and that was owned by the French. And remember now, the French had to surrender parts to Canada, their lands, because of something that we could probably get into on another slide or another presentation. Okay, question 3. What are 3 of the 5 protests that began the American Revolutionary War? Now, the American Revolutionary War is about the American then colonists rebelling against the British. These are quite tricky, so pay attention. Is it answer response A, the Stamp Act, the Homestead Act, and the Boston Tea Party Rebellion? Okay, be careful. Is it B, the Boston Tea Party Rebellion, Intolerable Acts, and the Spanish Indian Wars? Is it C, the British-Spanish Wars, the Boston Tea Party, and the Intolerable Acts? Is it D, the Boston Tea Party Rebellion, Intolerable Acts, and the Boston Tea Party? And let's get into something here. The British-Spanish Wars really didn't have a lot to do with us for question C. Intolerable acts is something that happened. Spanish Indian Wars kind of didn't really occur in the United States until later, and really wasn't a war the United States paid too much attention to. So B's out. And here you go, the Stamp Act. Here's a distractor here, the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act is about people owning properties, and that act was not in effect until 1862. And remember, July 4th, 1776 is when America gained its independence, or that's the date it was claimed. So we're talking about the 1700s, the latter parts. So your answer now, of course, has to be D. So it would be the Boston Tea Party. Remember, they threw tea into the harbor. Intolerable acts are also called coercive acts, and also the Boston Massacre. Tea Party Rebellion, all this stuff led to a massacre, unfortunately. Question 4. How did the 7 Years' War affect the colonists? This is just something you have to study. The 7 Years' War has to do with a war that was in Europe, and you're just going to have to know this. So question A, the Boston Tea Party Rebellion forced the British to overtax American colonists, and the French gave the British funds to support them. Okay, automatically, would that have happened? The French, the British, and Spanish were fighting over territory of the United States and the Caribbean. Okay, so maybe you want to rule A out. Question B, the Boston Massacre forced French citizens to return to France, and they then engaged in the 7 Years' War. I don't know about that, because French citizens weren't really forced to return. They were more or less just forced to give up land. So that wouldn't be it. C, the British and the French were fighting over American territories, and both countries fought for 7 years. Might be, because once again, we're fighting now for a certain time. And, or was it answer response D, the British Army overtaxed the American colonies for 7 years and the French government paid the taxes. Think about that. If the French government paid the taxes to help the Americans, that means the French government had the money and they would have been able to get their ownership back. So the only other choice you have then is C. Okay. Keep in mind, guys, you're always fighting for territory. Okay, what 5 items were taxed during the Townshend Acts of 1767? Hey, look at these dates, because remember I said 1776, July 4th, okay, was very significant in American history. So you're talking 9 years before the Americans finally got their independence. So let's think about some things. Answer response A says copper, gold, lead, paint, and paper. Was that likely? Think about it. This word here, gold. Gold wasn't discovered in the United States until almost another 50 years, if not even less than that. I mean, more than that before. Okay, we're talking copper, lead, silver, paint, and tea. Okay, be careful with these. Copper, lead, silver things we had, but like we didn't have 3 like chemicals over here to fight the British over. The American government, the American colonists didn't. Okay, okay, 5, glass, gold, lead, stamps, and tea. This is one of your other tricky questions because you have the Stamp Act, and a lot of people will go for this, so they'll say, hey, yeah, stamps. But guess what? The Stamp Act was also not only about how much people were charged, it was about charges for paper. So believe it or not, since glass was sold almost everywhere in the world, the answer is glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. And here are the two that help you. Paper, tea. Boston Tea Party. Tea was thrown in a harbor once again to rebel against the British. Paper was your stamp. And the rest of these three you're going to know. But here's how you figure this out. Question A, you have paint and paper. Question B, you have paint and tea. Question C, you have stamps and tea. You have to know the Stamp Act related to paper and tea. And that's how you pretty much get this answer. So it's just one you have to know. These are the questions and the answers. If you want to go and you have a GED book somewhere, if you want to go online, try to look it up. If you're doing online GED, however you're doing it through any of the study mechanisms, books that are ordered on Amazon or Books A Million or any other place, just review this and you have this. And again, you can play it slowly. Thank you so much. You have a great day.